Hi and welcome to a new episode with Thin Air. We are now somewhere in Bahamas, I think, with my simple jet, the jet I made in the last episode. I've been playing more with this jet, trying to understand the things that we have in the editor. And first of all, why the plane is called 02 here is because it somehow there was in the template there was actually a couple of more planes that were for air traffic, plane that the AI can put in the sky for you. So I have now removed, so I only have one there left, and I could rename it here, I guess, to get rid of that. But I have still kept the same folder structure, etc. I haven't changed that because trying to figure out how this works, if you start changing the names, as I told you, is that it will be a mess. It will be almost impossible to identify what does what in the simulator. And since we don't have any documentation to speak of from Asobo or Microsoft, I think this is the best way to approach this. So time to time I make a copy of my project, just so in case if it suddenly goes horribly wrong, I can always go back a step or two. So what I've done here, not much. Playing around with these folders, I don't do that much. Once you are actually up and running with your plane, most of the work is actually done here in the editor or somewhere else, like in the graphical program that you're using to actually make the model. What I did do is that I did get the sound to work after a while, and the way I did that was that I took the sound from Asobo, a simple hack. There is, luckily, if you go into the community folder and you go up one ladder to the official packages from one store or wherever you have bought them. So the CJ4, if you go to the scene objects there and look on the sound, it actually has the XML file still left there for some reason. Not all the models have that, so you will need this XML file. And I haven't looked into the other plane folders because there is not too many jets in the simulator, so I took this one. I also took the AI one, but this AI thing I think is unnecessary. That's only for planes flown by the AI. So I just copied those folders to my project folder, and suddenly the sound worked. I tried to keep the existing XML file I had, and it still didn't work. I don't know why. I changed everything accordingly in the XML file, but it didn't just work. So just grab and drag and drop worked fine. I've been going through. I started to try to be thorough on this, trying to put in the right weight of the plane and blah blah blah. But after a while I discovered that that is true, you have to do that sort of, but I mean the units, in this case ellipses, are maybe not too difficult to understand what it is, but slug, square, feet, I mean it could be any unit. It doesn't really, sitting down and trying to understand what that is in Newton meters or anything like that, it's ridiculous. So I have left those numbers basically. I changed the weight of the plane, of course, because this is much heavier than the propeller plane that you have in the simple project. So I've changed that accordingly to some numbers. And as you can see, the editor brings up some boxes, and I also used to indicate what are those weights and where are they placed in the plane. So for instance, the brownish boxes here, I think are the fuel tanks somehow, and the box size somehow shows you how much weight you have there, something like that. In the editor, under the weights, I did remove all the payloads that were available there. There was passengers, there was baggage and so on, so those I removed. I also used the gizmo here to place the empty weight CG. I also used the gizmo to place the datum position of the plane somewhere in the center. Contacts and brakes. Well, this needs to actually be polished a bit. As you can see, I don't have any undercarriage here, but I will explain soon why I haven't got that. But the contact points are actually not to be confused with collision points. I mean, these are more like if you run into a hard wall, where is that point, and so on in the plane. Contact point here, for instance, is a gizmo, and you can just move it to the front wheel. Next one, you can see what they have named these two, and you can create and add. This is a scrap point, for instance. Where is that scrap point? It's down here. It can scrap, the wing can scrap against something there. It should know about it. So it's a sort of like collision points if you hit something somewhere. I think this should be somewhere close to the wing. I just placed it wrong. I think it should be more. Well, I think that can stay. I think that is for the old wing actually. I should really move those. But I have managed to place some of these in the correct position. As you can see now, that one really should be a scrap point, should be somewhere on the wing here. And the only way to actually put this somehow correctly is that to look from above. Then you look from another side. You have to always look 90 degrees, because if you try to move it, otherwise it will just go wrong. So now that contact point is, for instance, roughly in the right position. As you can continue, you can also delete and add your contact points here down below in that menu. So once you do any changes like that, save and resync. And when you do that, these contact points should move. As you can see now, that contact point that we just moved here moved to another position. So that's that. For the brakes, I haven't touched anything. They seem to work fine. You can see on this debug window that I now have let me see if I can get this going. Now the handbrake is on 100%, now it's off, and then I'm braking. The brake goes up, the brake amount goes up while pressing the brake button on my joystick. So not too complicated to understand the brakes. Fuel, I only have two tanks in the plane, right main and left main. I kept it like that, basically. Well, you can see that the only left main and the right main that has actually a value of capacity. Now these tanks are, I guess, too small actually for comparing to the real thing, but it's just a number. Then we have probably the most interesting thing, which is the geometry, and this took me some time not to figure out what it was, but more like to understand how to get these three dots that you see over here. The orange tube that you see is more like the sim dimensions, so that you can turn off if you want to in the debug window. But you need to make sure that the sim dimensions are roughly as your plane is, so that you can change on the fuselage settings the size and the diameter, and then you have a gizmo to move this whole tube left and right. Sadly, when anything you do when you move something is that you have to save and resync. And once you do, let me show you. If I move this just a tiny weeny forward, then go File, Save and Resync. You don't see the tube move before you're done and save and resync, and once it does it, it goes to this default view from the back, which means that it's really hard to you have to every time go in and have a look. Okay, what happened? Where did it move? So you have to fiddle around with these menus and views all the time here. So for clarity, let me turn off sim dimensions, and let's go to the interesting part, which is the wing, for instance here. So I have put in an area of the wing, which is roughly the correct area that the real plane has. This band should also be correct, and then I put it in some root chord here and so on. The idea here is to get these measurement points or whatever they are, these green things. I thought I heard somewhere that there should be thousands of them, but really they are not, more like 40-50 of them here, what I can see in the simulator. So what you can do is that you can use these various parameters here to modify so that these green dots end up corresponding to the actual roughly the actual view size of the wings that you have on your airplane. And to get to this position, I started actually doing like this, that I went and did the following thing, that I went to the simple aircraft, and I actually did also steal, let me see here, sim objects, I think this is, yes, airplane. You have something called, if it was the aircraft configuration file, because I wanted the jet, my jet, to behave like a jet a little bit from the beginning, not as a propeller trying to become a jet. So I did actually steal this file also from the CJ4 folder, exactly as I showed you earlier. I just grabbed it and put it in, and when I did that, I can't show it right now for you, but then of course these green dots were according to the wings on the CJ4, and the elevator was somewhere up here and the rudder was somewhere back here. So I had, of course, I needed to move these things forward and backward to get them correct in the right positions. And after some trial and testing, flying the plane, I found, for instance, that the elevator area needed to be bigger than what actually was used on the model. So I just increased it. But there is another way actually to enforce the strength of that, so you could still keep the elevator as on the real plane. You can use the flight tuning here, so you can increase the effectiveness of let's say the elevator by increasing the number above 1, for instance. Then it will be stronger than and then fold. And if it's too strong, you just go under under 1, sorry, to make it less strong. As you can see here, if you go to the geometries, that you still have these so the box-shaped wings, what I understand. I haven't been able to get rid of that, to get the white boxes to become true to the plane somehow, but the most important thing was to get the green small bastards to become on the right place for the aircraft or the airframe. So also some of these numbers, position for instance here, -11 means -11 feet, it's actually feet here, from the datum point, how you move it forward and backward. And to shape the wings accordingly here, you have sometime you need to change, for instance, the let me see here, we had the sweep angle here. So it's a combination, so it's like somehow deep in math, I think, in math, the thing that if you have the sweep to, let's say, whatever, if the area is not big enough, that sweep won't become larger than you trying to type in here, whatever. So it's a bit tricky. You will understand it once you get hacking with those numbers. But what I wanted to show you is that I actually have tried to put in the green dots so they cover the flying surfaces of the wing. And then there is some additional measurement points here behind the plane and in front of the plane. They are like default. There's nothing I can manipulate here. For the fuselage, for instance, there is not too many things, and the same on the cockpit. It's not too many things. I think I changed this height. I don't believe that the cockpit is 5 feet high, but anyway. Aerodynamics. Well, let me load the plane again. Is that not every time, depending. Sometime when you load the aircraft, it doesn't turn on the engines. Then you would need to go manually and start the engines by using the shortcuts to start the engine. So what I usually do is that, as you know, when you start with a plane on an airfield in the simulator, usually the engine is running. And these parameters are also in a file somewhere in the system, keeping track of that, so that every button exactly are in the right position when you start the plane on the track. So these things are put into the configuration files for you from Asobo in this case. But so what do we see here? Well, we see you see also that I have actually managed to model the moving elevators, the rudder, and the ailerons. I will come to that. But if we fire up this plane into the air, we will a bit more see. You can see how this reacts to various things here. I think the geometry is almost nicer to see. Let's turn off the dimensions. Click in the right window. And if you have a look now on the gears, what they do when I lift it, you see that the wheel is spinning actually, and it goes like down when I lift. So I will explain why. It's not right, of course, but on the other hand, it's very good that they do move. It has taken quite a long time to understand why. But you can see here how the various points of the plane reacts on the plane flying. And this plane is actually the first plane that goes supersonic here. You can fly faster than Mach 1. And here you can see somehow they're showing you some information here. The plane is in the attack angle and so on. The big box is the roll. Sorry, it's the roll, yes, you can see. So if you align that up with the flow, so to speak, in the air, then they are flying completely straight. And then you go up, you can see how the force is represented on the elevator, for instance, here, down force. And I think that the red line is like the error between the lift and the forces or something like that. Not an error, but the difference. So let's go and pause the simulation. And let's have a look on some other things. Flight tuning. Well, if you find that you have covered the wings, etc. on your plane with the dots, but it still doesn't behave as it should, and then you can go and tune your plane using these very parameters over here. So you can make, for instance, the the elevator effectiveness here. I increased it to 1.3, you see here, just to have it better elevator authority. I haven't touched Autopilot. Reference speeds. Well, here you can actually put in some, like the max Mach 1.1 I did here. Then if you bring up the HUD, which because we don't have any instruments, because we don't have any cockpit yet, we can still see how fast the plane moves through the air. So it actually flies that fast. Interactive points. These are for, as it says here, gas trap. So if the plane is on the field and you call up on a fuel truck, where should it connect? So these points are actually the points that you see here in the sky where they are trying to connect here to. I think I moved these, but they are somehow back to the original position. So the interactive points are more for, you know, as you see, ground power unit, blah blah blah. If you don't need them, you can always remove them with a small X. If you don't, for instance, I think I've done it because there is, for instance, you don't want to bring out any stairs, etc. to the plane, so then I just remove them. Haven't touched flaps yet. Well, the engines we discussed sort of last time. I changed this to jet. And I did it by copying the configuration file from the CJ4. I removed one of the engines and added one more, and I made it a little bit more powerful than the engine from the CJ4. I haven't touched lighting. I did touch the cameras, and this is the view from the cockpit so far. It's actually quite nice. It's not so bad as it looks. Let me resume the simulator. It's quite done. I have to click in the window again to be able to control the plane. So that I showed you how you can move the camera to any wanted position and then save this as the pilot position. So that should be fine. So if you select the pilot position, then if you scroll down, you can see get from game. So it's just a matter of moving the camera to the wanted position, and then you press get from game. If you can't move the non-developer camera to the right position, then you need to go into the developer camera to be able to move it to the right position. So it has been a lot of fiddling around in these fields to get the plane flying as I wanted, sortish, at least somehow controllable, and trying to get the geometry correctly. I think that was the most important things, to get these measurement points to become where the wing of the plane is, so it resembles how this plane actually flew back in the days. As you saw, I did have some animations. For that we can turn off. Let's go to options, resume. I have managed to animate the rudders of the plane. So you can see now that they are working correctly. And you did see that the landing gear was a bit moving there when I started from the airfield. So this was a bit also, of course, tricky to understand how to get this going. Let me go and pause the simulation again. So let me show you something I have here under the model. In the model folder we have this simple aircraft XML, and if you look here, you will see that there is animations: center wheel, center gear, left gear, right gear, center tire animation, and so on and so on. You also have elevator percent key. You can see that the length of the animation should be 100 frames. Let's have a look on that. So here in Blender, the free 3D program for everyone, where I modeled my airplane, you can see that the landing gear is actually on the correct position, and here you can see all the animations I've done that I want to move, to be able to move into the game. So these are quite okay for the plane I have done. I mean, it looks pretty okay. I found out what you do because I won't be able to teach you how to use Blender. It's too complicated in one go. But what you will see here is that I just made 3 key points. So I got keyframes, and in each keyframe you can then store the rotation, for instance, of this. In this case, the Illyrian. You can store it on the timeline. So we did read in the XML that the elevation, for instance, here you have the Illyrian. It should be 100 frames long. So I made a keyframe on frame 0 and one on keyframe on frame 100. And then because in the XML you can see that there is actually left and right Illyrian, so you can make a separate animation for each Illyrian, which is good, because otherwise you can't turn basically. But I made in the beginning so that the left Illyrian also was in the down position in the start, and then became in the up position. But there is no way in the XML to turn the animation around, so what I had to do was just to animate it the other way compared to the other Illyrian. Next thing, the rudder was easy. I mean, it's only one rudder in the XML file here. There's only one rudder % key here. The same thing here. If you go to the end position, you can see that it's fully deflected to the left and fully deflected to the right. And then the simulator plays this animation according to your joystick movement. So if you don't move your joystick, it will end up on 50. And if you move your joystick to the left, it will go to the left, of course, just like this. And as you can see now, every thing is moving around here, but that will not be the case in the game. It will be only the rudder that moves. Then you have to time. This was the most tricky thing, I think. If you look here, this is an animation name, rudder % key. So somehow in Blender you have to save this animation with a name that is the correct one. So the empty thing here, this is the lines you see, the cross. You can call this, it's called scale rudder. I picked it up from somewhere else. I thought that was the key, but that wasn't the key. You can call it anything. I would like to actually call it empty rudder. So now it's an empty. This thing here we can call the rudder as it is. But the most important thing to get the things moving in simulator is that the animation has to have the right name. So in this case we have where is it? This part is not so finished in Blender either. Empty rudder here. You can see that I've called animation rudder % key, exactly as it says here in the XML file. So if you name the animation with the correct name, then it will work. And then of course, if you want to make your own animations to add to the XML, I don't know how to do that actually. First of all, you need to give every animation its unique GUID. And this is a global user ID or something like that. and you need to have a specific program that generates this GUID for you, because all these GUIDs should be unique for everyone, everywhere, basically, somehow. So again, use the simple aircraft template as is. Don't try to start to make it too complex from the beginning, because I think there will be a mess. But anyway, just by tying the name here on the animation as in the XML file, then exporting this all using the MSFS toolkit that you have for Blender, then it worked. So it's quite nice actually to see the rudders move in the simulation. As you can see, the elevators are not correctly, because I messed it up a little bit, because there's only one elevator in the XML file. So I had to make both elevators to move to one input, so to speak. And it was and I was fiddling around with that. I lost the 0 points for the elevators, and then well, it doesn't really matter. This is just a fun stick play. The most important thing is to understand how this is done, and then I can maybe explain to you why the wheels are behaving as they are. If you go back to the options and pause the simulation, you can see that the wheels are somewhere in between here, and this is because I have tied the names of the animations to the wrong part. I have tied the animation of the actual retract gear movement to the wheel rotation. So the wheel are sort of rotated 50%, as you can see here. So these are, the position is now like in 50% position. So that's why so each time the gear spins around a little bit, it actually moves the gear instead of the wheel. So I will change that, of course, so that the wheel spins around and so on, and that the landing gear will work as it should. But coming this far is quite fun, because this means that well, I could now model a proper Saab 35 Dragon, Draken, and I could actually make it more or less functional, and I could also add a cockpit and so on to the plane. But I think that to understand how to make it gorgeous and so on, this is complicated as it is. So it's been fun playing with this, and actually, let me see here, we can spin it around a little bit. Let's go supersonic, close to the ground. If you go so to speak, if you put the numbers wrong in the editor, the plane will start shaking a lot. So you see that it's almost now shaking a little bit. It could be also because of the wind and so on around here in the area. But well, it flies. It flies. Another thing is that when you are in this developer mode, and if you crash the plane, it's not end of the simulation. So let's put the plane down somewhere here. Let's find a long street to land on. I don't bother about airports at this point. I don't have any flaps, but this plane is quite okay to fly, but it's a little bit heavy still, and it's a bit nose heavy also. I haven't figured that out. Another thing is that there is also the plane is a little bit always pointing a bit down on the nose, but I'll figure that out as I go. Let's land on this highway here, and as soon as wheels start spinning, you will see that the gear starts moving, in one direction or the other. As you can see, there is no real crashes happening here. But the contact points that we saw in the editor are now enabled, not against cars. Let's see, put in some brakes. No, we rushed after into the woods. The brakes works. Let's put in the brakes. Okay. Let's see if there was anything in the editor that was of importance that I missed. General, of course, blah blah blah, if you wanted to pilots, but they are not visible in this view anyway, so you won't be able to see them, I guess. Weight and balance, except all these funny units I don't understand, libs and slug blah blah blah. We don't have them here in Sweden. There is some data over here that you can read. There is some how much pressure is on each wheel and blah blah blah. Quite interesting if you want to read that. Contacts should be where your wheels are, of course, and all other contact points that are, you know, for scrap points or scrape points maybe, where you can hit something with those scrape points. Fuel is the tanks, and the engine, I think you have to go into the how much the engines consume. Is again just a number somewhere. So these engines are very lean for the moment. They don't consume more than that on the propeller plane that we started off with. Geometry, you have to align the green dots by using the various fields here. And if you start with the right numbers here and then play with them, and just exaggerate the numbers if you don't see anything happening on the dots. And the same thing here again. If you change a number here, let's say you want to adjust, for instance, the height of the wing, where the wing is, then you go put in the number here, then you have to go File, Save and Resync to find out where the dots have moved. So it would be nice if the simulator could stay always like in the view you have, save and resync, and you can see how the dots moves from one position to another position. Elasticity, I think, is for, you know, elastic things, wings shake. Aerodynamics are a little bit hard to read, especially when you're flying. Because you're concentrated on flying instead of looking on the numbers, it's a little bit difficult, but you can see here that the plane is always nose down attitude for some reason. Flight tuning, if you have done the points, put the points on the right place, but still the plane doesn't fly as it should, you can always go and tweak. I would say this is flight tweaking, not tuning. You can tweak so that the elevator is more effective than it should be, or so on, or less effective if you feel it like that. Autopilot I haven't touched. Reference speeds, well, it's just the speeds of the plane. So for instance, it won't fly faster than the number you put into the Mach. Max indicated speed here, for instance. I just put in the number 700. I don't know what is in Mach. Maybe I should be faster than that. Interactive points, there are like fueling points, blah blah blah. Ground power units where they should park when they attach themselves to the plane. Flaps I haven't touched yet, actually. Engines, of course, have touched, as I saw in the last flight, the last video I made. Lighting, less important, of course they are there. If you go into night mode, you will of course see the lights go on. And here you can see actually where the light is pointing, so that is quite easy to move to the correct position and have the right lights. Cameras are all these 28 or something cameras that are that you have available. The pilot one is the most interesting, I think, from the beginning. Cockpit. I think this is when you start fiddling around with the gauges and so on, because here you have all these gauges what this should show in the cockpit. What these are the actual numbers that you will see on the gauges, I guess, in the cockpit. I think it's that, but I don't have a cockpit here, so I won't be able to show you that. Okay, so that has been a report from Thin Air on the progress of the Saab 35 Draken. I will fix the landing gear so it actually animates correctly. So that will be the next step. Then I'll see what I do here in the future. Thank you and bye bye.